Our next company up is Power Metal Resources, an AIM-listed metals exploration and development company. POW, Power Metal, has interests in a portfolio of projects across Africa, Australia, and North America. And it's exploring and developing for cobalt, copper, gold, nickel, silver, PGMs, and REE. And what Power Metal hopes to find is a large-scale metal discovery. Paul Johnson, CEO, and Oliver Friesen, Exploration Manager, they join us tonight. So it's a double header. We'll get two for the price of one. Paul will introduce the company and talk for a few minutes, and Oliver will take us through three of their interests in Western Australia, Botswana, and in Canada, and then they will both take questions. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Donald. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you beautifully, Paul.
That's good, thank you. I come from a private investor background. I'm a chartered accountant for my sins as well. And one question I asked myself about the junior resource space, and I invest heavily in the junior resource space, but I do wonder how junior companies around the world, Australia, Canada, and in the UK, can ever possibly make a discovery, given their limited access to capital, the flexibility they have to display on a day-to-day basis in their businesses, the difficulty and challenge of a heavily cyclical market where things go very positively for a period and then very negatively for what seems to be a much longer period. And I think after my experience over about 10 years in public companies, seeing the major highs in the likes of Greatland Gold that I helped to refinance and restructure in 2016, go on to £1 billion cap, and other companies that perhaps in certain cases haven't performed quite as well. I've seen that it's creativity, it's innovation, it's constantly adapting and changing that really makes the difference. And the business model we have for you tonight is forged on that basis. It's taking a very small company from 2.5 years ago with a less than £1 million cap, building its portfolio, building its value, strengthening its finance, and taking it to a new level where we think we're in the position to make a number, not just one, a number of major discoveries. Now, moving on, in our presentation, we have a short presentation for you tonight because we have 13 projects across 3 continents. We can't do it in 18 minutes. So we've skimmed down to a quick overview of the business by me, and then Oliver, who's far more talented, good-looking, and knowledgeable, is going to take you through 3 of our operational projects that are in exploration phase right now. And in addition, he's going to take you through the recent acquisition of our uranium interests in the Athabasca Basin in Canada. We have a disclaimer. I'm not going to go through that, but please, I would always urge everybody, don't believe the speakers, including me, including Oliver. Please use this opportunity tonight to learn a little bit about the company and then move on and do your own research. It's so vital. We are all talking our own book. Power Metal Resources as a company is a global project. It's spread across 3 continents. We have 13 projects across those 3 continents. Already underway or planned for 2021 are 11 exploration programs, and 5 of those include drilling. We are going into one of the most active phases in the company's life cycle. We've built over the last 2.5 years, since February 19, what I think is one of the most powerful exploration and development models in the London capital markets or potentially the world. We've done it on the back of hard work, working like donkeys really half the time, and also using that creativity and innovation to work with joint venture partners to acquire new opportunities, to spread out our connection base and find the next best projects. We're pretty much focused on district scale discoveries where possible, as you'll see in the portfolio that I'm about to take you through. Now, the question I ask myself, or the second question, is why is it so few directors of public companies invest in their own propositions? And I think the reason is because they know the odds. When you're running a junior resource exploration company, you understand more than anyone else how difficult it is to make it a success. And from an investment perspective, you can with the cycles and the swings in valuations up and down, make considerable amounts of money from the space, even if the companies you invest in never find a bean, never find any form of metal deposit discovery. because that's the nature of the markets. But I think if you want to maximize your chance of success as an investor, you follow the money. And Power Metal Resources is my primary investment as a private investor. I'm a little tired of seeing so little invested by public company directors in their own proposition. So on the screen now, you'll see my purchase history. Now, over the last 2.5 years since we started, I've been a relentless buyer of my own stock. Now, I'm not going to mention this to Michelle, my wife, because she doesn't quite know exactly how much I spent, and I didn't until recently when I had a look at this breakdown. I need, as a CEO in an entrepreneurial market, in an innovative company, to show that I believe my own story, and that's why over the last 2.5 years, I've invested cash. This is not fees being swapped for shares. This is real cash into Power Metal. If this company works, if it delivers, I benefit tremendously. And at that point, of course, I will tell Michelle about exactly how much cash I've put into the company. Moving forward to our business model. So what do I believe in? Well, it's very simple, our model. We've built a range of opportunities. We've acquired over the last 2.5 years, quite a few different projects. They are modest cost, controlled budgets. We know exactly what we're doing with them. We're not overstretching ourselves. We work hard, but we're not silly. And we have control of everything we are engaged with, as you would expect. Now, we started with 3 projects in Western Central Africa back in February 19. We now have those 13 projects across 3 continents. And our plan is to develop, wherever possible, all of our projects initially internally. We want to see what we've got, see what we're handling. And of course, if opportunities come for disposals, we will take that disposal route if it's in our benefit and the benefit for our shareholders. If we decide that we like our projects from an internal development perspective, we will develop them. Now, it may well be that we have a project which is worthy of a joint venture partner, so bringing someone in from outside, in which case we will move to an external joint venture with a partner. But we also have a model where we're looking to vend out certain of our project interests into their own vehicles, building separate IPOs and creating what we think is the potentially tremendous value on our balance sheet. And why do we do that? Well, we think our project portfolio as it stands has the opportunity to make multiple discoveries for the company. If you make multiple discoveries, the cost of operations at those projects increase dramatically. And by vending out some of our interests, building our balance sheet value, we will have the financial capability in-house to stand our ground. And ultimately, if you want to sell dispose of opportunities outside the company for an optimal value, you need to show those potential acquirers that you have the financial capability to take those projects forward on your own behalf.
You're overrunning, Paul.
What's that, sorry?
It's time to go to Oliver.
Yeah. Okay, so there's our global operations. We're going to cover 3 of our projects, and on the screen there is the full project list. Lots of further information on our website, and now I'll hand over to Oliver, who will take you through those project interests.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Paul. As Paul did mention, I'm going to be going over 3 assets within our particular portfolio today. Now, if there was an asset that you did want more information on, I'm always available to chat. So please feel free to reach out to me on email or Twitter after the fact, and we can definitely get something set up. And I'm going to provide those contact details later. So my goal today with the limited time that I do have is to get you excited about the discovery potential that exists on 3 projects within our portfolio where work is currently ongoing. Then I want to mention that these were chosen strictly because we do have crews on the ground. They were not cherry-picked by any means. And I am quite confident that if we were to set up a chat to go over in detail our entire portfolio, that I would be able to get you excited about the discovery potential that does exist on every project currently within our portfolio. And at the end, I'm briefly going to touch on the most recent project announcement, which came out to the market last week, as we've been getting lots of questions about those particular assets. So jumping straight into it, in Botswana, we're going to be talking about our Tati projects. And if you do follow Power closely, I'm sure you've noticed a lot of news flow that's been coming out on this particular project. One thing I think that's important to highlight here is the fact that we've been progressing the exploration at pace. So the original option agreement on this property to earn 100% was announced on May 6th. And in less than 5 months, we were able to identify 5 targets based on our historic data compilation. We then initiated a phase 1 work program, which saw the collection of over 1,000 soil samples and 50 rock samples. And since then, we've released those results, and we immediately initiated a phase 2 program, which is geophysics based, which will be wrapping up shortly. So results for that should be coming out shortly. And by the start of October, we're going to be initiating our inaugural drill program on the property, which will see at least 1,000 meters of RC drilling across several of the targets that we've identified to date. As a quick interlude, I think this project should provide a bit of an example as to the mandate that Paul kind of discussed earlier. We bring in generally unloved or undervalued assets into the portfolio at competitive valuations. We then find ways to increase value either through simply holding those assets through the precious metals market, more likely by conducting meaningful laser-focused exploration with the goal of ultimately making a discovery. In terms of the Tati project, however, today I want to focus on the Sekukwi zone specifically, which was previously named the Grid 1 zone. Now, what's particularly interesting about this anomaly is our historic data compilation. So just move on to the next slide there. There's 2 of them. Yeah, fantastic. So what's interesting about this particular zone is the historic data comp that we did over this area. It highlighted a broad, relatively low magnitude soil anomaly with results up to 23 parts per billion gold. Now, given that we are dealing with Kalahari cover in this part of Botswana, it was certainly an interesting anomaly, but comparing it to some of the other anomalies that exist over some of the gold deposits within the Tati Greenstone belt, it wasn't quite up to snuff. But with that being said, we decided to initiate our high resolution soil sampling campaign. And sure enough, those are the results that you're looking at there. And what's really interesting is not only is the anomaly grown in size, it's roughly 2 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide, which it remains open in multiple directions, but the magnitude of the soil results increased significantly. Now, that main core that you see running in sort of a northwest-southeast direction, that's roughly 100 parts per billion gold. And in the northern part of the property, you're actually seeing a single result that was 1,600 parts per billion gold. So I think this should highlight the discovery potential that exists here. Another thing to quickly note is the gold source zone. So there is very limited outcrop in this particular property, but we were able to get some samples from a small area that was outcropping, and sure enough, we were able to grab some high-grade gold samples. So obviously that bodes really well for the rest of the anomaly. And as I mentioned, we're going to be drilling this target and other targets within these projects starting in October. So we're going to have more news on the phase 2 results, as well as the outlining kind of the drill plans in the next couple of weeks here. And then moving on to Paterson here on the next slides. As you might have noticed, we also announced that we've conducted or started our phase 1 work program early last week. Now, I put out a few short technical videos on this particular project, but I think it's important to go over the details once again because it's a bit of an abstract geological target here. And I think it's really important to understand what our sort of main target or what our main focus is that we're testing. Now, the analog, moving on to the next slide there, the analog that we've been using is Greatland Gold's Havieron discovery, and which I'm sure many investors watching today are quite familiar with. And the reason that we're using this particular discovery as an analog is because Havieron was made or discovered by drilling a geophysical anomaly that ended up being located below roughly 450 meters of post-mineral sedimentary cover. So because of that, when we acquired the project, the first thing we did was to acquire multiple historic geophysical data sets. And luckily, we had really good coverage over the Walal tenements. And to our excitement, we actually discovered 3 isolated magnetic bullseye-shaped anomalies that you will see on the map in front of you. So to the west there, it's the western anomaly, the eastern anomaly, and then on the border with Rio Tinto is the border anomaly. Now, obviously, having a geophysical anomaly is encouraging, but we need to do a lot more work before we can go ahead and drill these. So the work program that we just started is a reprocessing of some historic 2D seismic lines that run over the western anomaly. And then we're going to be conducting some passive seismic lines over the eastern and border anomalies. And by overlapping these data sets, we're able to get a good idea of the depth of bedrock that we should expect on those geophysical anomalies. It's also worth noting that I was actually speaking to a geologist about Havieron the other day, and he mentioned that what was particularly unique about the Havieron discovery was the fact that there was a coincident gravity high anomaly associated with it. So what I did is I pulled up some of the historic gravity data sets over the eastern anomaly. And sure enough, there was a bullseye-shaped gravity anomaly as well that was slightly offset. So I thought that was quite an encouraging development that I thought was worth sharing today. And then finally moving on to our Authier North project, which is an acquisition that we made relatively recently into our wholly owned subsidiary, Power Canada. Now, once again, we've initiated our phase 1 work program late last week, and we currently have crews on the ground as we speak. As you'll see on the map here, I'm just highlighting areas A, B, C, and D, which we will be focusing on for this particular work program. So target areas B and A, and kind of the northern part of the property there. The idea is that the Sayona lithium-bearing pegmatite dips towards the north. It remains wide open. So obviously we're testing for sort of the down dip extension of that pegmatite underneath our property. And another kind of interesting development here is I was actually looking through the Quebec, it's called the SIGEOM database, which is kind of an online repository of geological data. And I noticed a single drill hole, and you'll see I've marked it on the map there as a little star AU 1224, which was a hole that was drilled in 2012 to about roughly 90 meters. And it actually intersected, I looked at the geological logs, it intersected multiple pegmatitic dikes within that 90 meters. So obviously that gives us further encouragement that potentially we are looking at the same geology, and it does dip undercover on our property. So I thought that was definitely worth noting. And obviously another thing to point out here is the fact that Sayona is about to put that mine in production in 2023. Obviously the best place to look for a deposit is as they say, in the shadow of a head frame. So considering that the Sayona lithium-bearing pegmatite is sort of the outcropping at surface, it was sort of the low-hanging fruit. So most of the work historically was focused on delineating that target. But very little work has been done sort of immediately around that. So we're the first company to come in there and conduct meaningful exploration on some of those satellite targets, which is really exciting. And then finally moving on to an acquisition that we put out last week, which generated quite a bit of buzz. I want to mention that uranium is a commodity that Paul and I have been targeting for some time now. It's not something that we just jumped on in the last 2 weeks since the price started to move. We've actually been looking at a few other uranium assets worldwide, particularly in USA and Australia. And with the recent sale of our Ontario assets out of Power Canada, we felt like it was a really good time to expand our strategic green metal business in Power Canada. So with the recent price moves, they kind of came before we were ready. So it made fully executing our strategy a bit difficult. So we kind of had to be quiet while we staked the ground that we've been targeting for some time now. But we're happy to say that we did target some really great ground, and we're really happy with our particular land package. And what we're going to do is we're going to announce some further details on this package in the next couple of weeks here. And I think it's also important to note that uranium bull markets, they tend to be quite choppy, but ultimately we're bullish on uranium going forward in the medium to long term here. It's just another piece that we wanted to add to our portfolio. And I think it's important to have exposure here, and particularly in Saskatchewan and in the Athabasca Basin, which is one of the best uranium one of the best places in the world to be looking for uranium. And then moving on to, I think that's the final slide there. So just the contact details. As I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to discuss any of these properties or anything else with Paul or myself. We're always happy to chat.
Okay, Oliver, fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's stay with the Authier North lithium project, given that's where we're at. Was the decision to acquire that prospect, was it influenced by the announcement in January 2021 that neighbours Sayona were announcing a strategic partnership and offtake agreement with Piedmont Lithium? So are you interested in that the proximity to a successful
Of course, yeah. It's a neurology thing, right? And we were quite surprised to be able to get such a large land package immediately surrounding Sayona for the price that we did. So obviously the success they're having there is a big part of this. Ultimately, our goal is to find lithium-bearing pegmatites on our ground. And if we are successful in doing that, I think the re-rate here on this particular asset could be quite substantial.
Okay. One for Paul. You've lost your chairman. A gentleman called, let me skim through all my questions that I have pouring through here. Andrew Bell. Zafar Karashi asks, with the departure of Andrew Bell, do we already have someone in mind, a new chairman in mind? And how quickly do we expect to fill this important role?
Okay, so I have to say, first of all, that Andrew has been absolutely essential to the building of this portfolio over the last 2.5 years. He's done an incredible job. He's ballsy and determined and prepared to take risks. And also, the positive decisions that are needed to grow this type of portfolio. We haven't lost him. He's working with us for at least a further 12 months. He stepped down from the board position because we have a tremendous opportunity in Red Rock, Australasia, which is now, of course, changing its name to New Ballarat Gold Corporation PLC. He's planning to list in London this year. And there's huge amounts of effort going into that particular spin-out vehicle, as it were. And we think, collectively that it needs a lot of focus. He also has Red Rock Resources, his other public company. So he hasn't gone anywhere. He's, working with us. I'm delighted he's given us so much time over the last 2.5 years. We will fill the position as quickly and efficiently as we can, but most importantly, with the right person.
Okay, Susan Waite says, obviously you're going to continue leading the company. Presumably no interruption in progress for the new chairman and so on. Is one really needed?
Well, you have to have a chairman, really, if you're a public company. Ideally, you want to have a split chairman and chief executive officer role. Yes, you do. You have to have one. I am leading the company. I've been privileged to do so for 2.5 years. I'd like to keep going for some while longer. I am dependent on shareholder support. It kind of helps that I'm the largest shareholder in the company, of course, but we are building something incredible. We think we have an amazing team. Look, I see the quality of Oliver tonight, his presentation, his know-how, his drive and determination. There are, lots of other people within the team. We're hugely excited. We're on the cusp, Donald, we think, with all these exploration programs, all these drill programs planned of those major metal discoveries with a little bit of good fortune. Okay,
let me throw back to Oliver. And let me ask you a question, Oliver. What is it that an exploration manager actually does in a business like yours? What's your day-to-day?
Well, it's pretty busy. My background is I'm a geologist, obviously. More specifically, I come from a consulting background, so I help manage and I ran a consulting company back in Canada. Our mandate was to do efficient exploration on the ground, make discoveries, and obviously make sure that clients' sort of needs were being met. So that's a great segue into what I'm doing here at Power. Obviously, with such a large portfolio, it's hard to sort of manage everything. So don't think that I'm doing it all myself. So for each particular project, we have an in-country project partner. We typically like to pair up with someone who's quite well-renowned or is quite somewhat of an expert in that particular area. So essentially, my job is to liaise with all these different people. They know the different jurisdictions better than I do. In some cases, especially in Africa and Australia.
Are you essentially managing those relationships?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I manage those relationships. I keep an eye on budgets, and obviously I'm ultimately making decisions with Paul on how we push our exploration forward. But it's a busy job, I'll tell you that for sure. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. Tati Greenstone Belt in Botswana. We often hear the term Greenstone Belt when companies talk about gold prospects. So what's the significance of Greenstone Belt?
Yeah, so greenstone's a geological term. It just refers to a level of metamorphism. And I won't go into too much detail there, but essentially all you need to know is the fact that these are essentially areas where you're typically going to find greenstone-hosted gold deposits. They're some of the most prolific kind of areas to look for gold in the world. The Abitibi Greenstone Belt in Canada is a good example. So it's a great place to be looking for gold, as you can probably see on one of the previous maps there. This particular greenstone belt has multiple active gold mines, so it's a great place to be working.
Right. Okay. And to Walal, close to Havarian in Paterson, the magnetic bullseyes at Walal display similar characteristics with Greatland Gold's Havarian. Expand on those similarities. Are you keen on one because Havarian, obviously, with Greatland Gold has been such a great success, and you think you can replicate that success?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think kind of what I announced today, or what I alluded to today, was another kind of important development there. Obviously, when you're looking for these targets undercover, there's sort of limited amount of exploration data that you're able to acquire. In this case, we're going off the fact that there is obviously the mag anomaly And in terms of magnitude, so that's something that's, I think, is in our presentation that you can find online. The actual magnitude of that anomaly, which is how magnetic that rock is very, very comparable to Willow. So that's obviously a really good indication. And obviously the size, it's almost an identical size as well. Now, these are two important factors, but obviously there's a lot more that goes into this. I think the coincident gravity anomaly is an important development here. There's lots of geophysical mag targets elsewhere within the Paterson province, a lot of them which don't have that coincident gravity high. So just another kind of geophysical comparison that lead us to obviously make that analog. But obviously, ultimately, we got to test these with the truth machine, and that's with the drill. So we're doing everything we can to prove these targets up, make sure that they are viable, and then we'll announce more to the market about what our plans are in terms of a drilling campaign on Willow.
Okay, uranium. You put out an RNS taking on exploration licenses for uranium in Saskatchewan, Canada last week, and the share price jumped 13%. So why uranium and why Saskatchewan?
Yeah, good question. I think I touched on this a bit, but I can definitely go over it again. As I mentioned, uranium is something that Paul and I have been looking at for quite some time now. As you noticed in the power portfolio, we are very diversified. We like to have exposure to lots of different metals that we are bullish on in the medium to long term. Uranium is definitely one of them. I really think the fundamentals here are in favor of a really good uranium bull market here and a sustained increase in the price. And then in terms of jurisdictions, we were looking at lots of different areas, as I mentioned. Typically, the deposits in Saskatchewan are much, much higher grade and more profitable than anything you're going to find elsewhere in the world. There are some deposits, obviously, in sort of the Western Asian, in the Kazakhstans and whatnot. We're obviously not going to go in there. But in terms of really good jurisdictions, Saskatchewan's one of the best in the world. I know Canada well, and I know the different consulting companies that work out of Canada well. So it was a natural fit, and we were able to get in there with a relatively low price tag. And once again, it's one of the best places in the world to work. And more importantly, it's one of the best places to find high-grade uranium.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. To you, Oliver, last question of the evening to Paul from Richard Tansley, who asks, how are you going to finance all these projects, especially when you make a discovery? So when it gets big, how do you sort out the financing?
Yep. Okay. So we touched on that earlier, which is we create our own wealth. I've spent 10 years restructuring and refinancing lots of different companies. I've stopped that work outside, and I'm now doing that work inside Power Metal Resources. We will build our own project base, build our own vehicles that we will spin out onto listed markets theoretically around the world. That's one area that we generate wealth. We have investments. We invest as well. It's only a small part of our business, but it's been quite successful, as is in the public domain, and that generates wealth. We have significant, robust underlying working cash positions at all times. I'm an accountant. I'm worried about risk. I'm worried about money. I make sure we're in a good position, and we are today in a good position. We were 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And by building our balance sheet to what we think can be quite a tremendous amount, we will be able to stand our ground. We will be able to fund and finance our own programs. We won't have a gun held to our head at any time, and that's absolutely vital. So we're going to finance it using our own capabilities and growing our financial strength.
Paul Johnson, CEO at Power Metal, thank you very much indeed. And also thank you to Oliver Friesen, the Exploration Manager. Thank you for joining us tonight. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.